the committee has enough time to look into the details of the medium-term expenditure framework document that is currently before us. Mr. President, distinguished colleague, we are putting together a 5-day interactive session to critically analyze this document as areas of interest which borders on the benchmark, the exchange rates, the interest rates, and also other sources of independent revenue accruing to the government will be exhaustively looked into. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, together we have 50 revenue agencies of the government, a report which was submitted to us by the Ministry of Budget and National Planning, which is divided into 3 categories. Those agencies of the government that are fully funded from the federal budget, those agencies of the government that are partly funded from the federal budget, and those agencies of the government that are independent of the federal budget. Mr. President, we will also be looking into the NNPC activities as it affects the medium-term expenditure framework. Mr. President, all of this, within the next 5 days, the Joint Committee will look into and make adequate report on our findings to the Senate at the end of this exercise. Let me once more use this opportunity to thank all our invited guests and the Ministry of Finance, Budget and Economic Planning for coming forward with various documents which this committee has requested for within the shortest possible time. Once more, I thank you for listening, and I wish you a very successful deliberation. Thank you, and God bless you.
Distinguished Senator Ajiya, the Chief Whip of the Senate, other principal officers of the Senate, the Chairman, Senate Committee on Finance, the Chairman, Senate Committee on National Planning and Economic Affairs, very distinguished senators, members of the Committees on Finance and National Planning and Economic Affairs, the Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, the Honorable Minister of State, Budget and National Planning, very distinguished invited guests, particularly the head of government agencies present and represented, distinguished ladies and gentlemen of the press. I'm most pleased to welcome you all to this stakeholder interactive session on the 2021-2023 Medium-Term Expenditure Framework, MTF, and Fiscal Strategy Paper, FSP, ahead of preparations for the 2021 budget estimates. This interactive session should help stakeholders here to study the document after the Senate considered it at its sitting on Tuesday, 21st July 2020, and referred it to the Joint Committee on Finance and National Planning for further legislative scrutiny. We need to reckon that the 2021-2023 Medium-Term Expenditure Framework, MTF, and Fiscal Strategy Paper, FSP, are according to the provisions of the Fiscal Responsibility Act 2007, while this session is consistent with our operational procedure of engagement with necessary stakeholders. As a result, about 46 organizations, and the chairman said 50, so I retain his number, and agencies will take turns over the next 5 days to engage the Joint Committee on aspects of the document as a prelude to developing a watertight framework and paper. And we know that the MTF determines to a very large extent what the budget estimates framework will look like. We understand that we are in dire times. The COVID-19 pandemic has dislocated plans such that we now need to be much more prudent with our resources and be concerned with what we prioritize. We must aim to use scarce resources to achieve as much as possible Our revenue-generating and collecting agencies must strategize to perform efficiently and optimally. Dwindling revenues remain a major bane of execution of government projects and programs. And of course, we know that for a long time, at least from last year, revenues have been our major problem. And therefore, our agencies must be tasked to ensure that we get more effective and efficient in collection and generation. The Senate and indeed the National Assembly have been unwavering in the drive towards fulfilling our mandates, and we are determined to continue on this path, in line with our legislative agenda and the ultimate delivery of the proverbial dividends of democracy. Our charge to you as stakeholders is to join us in our determination by being patriotic in your submissions, remembering that we stand to gain more if we put nationhood over anything else. The Joint Committee has thought through the agenda and will require you to be forthcoming with facts so that we can come up with more informed decisions. We need the budget to guide us in the coming year, but we will base this on meaningful inputs. I'm confident we'll get nothing less from you, and I'm therefore pleased to welcome you all to this session. By way of digression, I think there's no gainsaying that we need a lot more resources because we have more challenges. Unfortunately for us, our major source of revenue, the oil and gas, is facing some challenges. Thank God, our consolation is the price of crude is gradually increasing, and we hope that this increase will continue to the next year and beyond. But one fact remains clear, that today, because we have very scarce resources, we borrow in order to build our infrastructure deficit. This is one very important aspect of governance that we have to address adequately. This administration has shown willingness and indeed the capacity to provide infrastructure across the country. But this administration is also challenged by the paucity of funds. Consequently, we have to borrow. I think the time has come for us as an administration to start to think of other sources and means of funding our infrastructure. Definitely, the deficits of infrastructure is so much. But then we have to be a little bit more liberal and elaborate in terms of looking for sources of funding. I think the time has come for us to look into the private-public sector, public partnerships and BOTs. This is inevitable. So it's for us, both in the legislature and the executive, to sit down and work out what we think will be an attractive sort of proposals to attract those who have resources in the private sector to come and invest. We can get people, business concerns, who will be interested in building our roads. Why can't we give them the opportunity to do so? But only on favorable terms and conditions. But it is inevitable that we have to look for ways and means of ensuring that we bring in private sector investments into building our infrastructure. On this note, it is my pleasure to declare this interactive session open to the glory of God. God bless you all. God bless the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Thank you.
That was the keynote address given to us by His Excellency, the President of the Senate of the Federal Republic of Nigeria and Chairman of the National Assembly, distinguished Senator Ahmed Lawan. There is also planning and expenditure side to this budget, which I chair. And it is my pleasure to inform you that that planning and expenditure side will also be given some detailed attention at appropriate time in coming weeks. As today, And for this session, we are dwelling on the revenue side because without revenue, the budget is as good as the paper on which it is written. And I'm glad to inform you that the Senate of the Federal Republic has approved a planning and budget roundtable to enable us to discuss the planning and the expenditure side of the budget, and at the appropriate time, in coming weeks, we are going to move expeditiously into this round of consultation. On this note, I'd like to thank His Excellency, the Senate President, for finding time within his very, very busy schedule to be present with us, as well as his team, the leader and the chief whip. We also want to thank the Minister of State for Budget and Planning in the Ministry, the DG Budget, Mr. Agbas, heads of agencies and parastatals that have come here to interact at this important session. On this note, I'd like to thank you.
First, to give us the presentation will be the Honourable Minister of State.
Budget and National Planning, who had planned to be here, but currently under the weather. So she has asked that I send her apologies. I'm sure, sir, that you have copies of the presentation, so I'll be going through it. For outline, I'll be giving a background, an overview of our 2020 fiscal outcomes from January to June 2020, the 2021 to 2023 key assumptions and macroeconomic framework, overview of the 2021 to 2023 MTF, how we plan to manage the fiscal crisis, and then conclusions. The Nigerian economy faced serious challenges in the first half of 2020, with the macroeconomic environment significantly disrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Crude oil prices declined sharply in the world market, with Bonny Light crude oil price dropping from a peak of $72.2 per barrel on January 7, 2020, to below $20 per barrel in April 2020. In effect, the $57 per barrel crude oil price benchmark on which the 2020 budget was based became unsustainable. Another key development in the international crude oil market is the massive output cut by OPEC and its allies, OPEC Plus, to stabilize the world oil market, with Nigeria contributing about 300,000 barrels per day of production cuts. The impact of this development is about 65% decline in projected net 2020 government revenues from the oil and gas sector, with adverse consequences for foreign exchange inflows into the economy. Nigeria is exposed to spikes in risk aversion in the global capital markets, which will put further pressure on the foreign exchange market as foreign portfolio investors exit the Nigerian market. Nigeria's second quarter GDP growth is in all likelihood negative. And unless we achieve a very strong third quarter 2020 economic performance, the Nigerian economy is likely to lapse into a second recession in 4 years with significant adverse consequences. In response to the developments affecting the supply of foreign exchange to the economy, the Central Bank of Nigeria adjusted the official exchange rate to 360 naira per US dollar, and more recently to 379 naira per US dollar. The disruptions in global trade and logistics would negatively affect custom duty collections in 2020. The COVID-19 containment measures, though necessary,
have inhibited domestic economic activities with consequential negative impact on taxation and other government revenues. Consequently, the projections for customs duty, stamp duty, value-added tax, and company income tax revenues were recently reviewed downwards in the revised 2020 budget. In terms of peer comparison, total taxes to GDP, value-added tax to GDP, and excise to GDP indicates that there's a capacity to do a lot more to improve our fiscal space. Because when we look at the sub-region, we are not doing very well when compared to other countries. So we have a lot of room for improvement. However, in terms of revenue performance from 2016 to 2019, both in oil revenues, non-oil revenue, independent revenue, and other revenues, there seemed to be a positive growth in the revenues inflow. However, there's still a lot of room for improvement. Customs revenue has generally performed close to target over the last few years, exceeding target in 2019. There has been some improvement in the company income tax and VAT remittances. We expect significant improvements in VAT collections with the new VAT rate of 7.5%. Over the past 5 years, actual revenue performance averaged 61.4%. Some of our reforms are yielding positive results, with significant improvements between 2018 and 2019. We believe we can do more to improve revenues, especially remittances from government-owned enterprises, possibly up to 1 trillion per annum. The support of the National Assembly by ensuring coordinated oversight would contribute to achieving this target. In terms of the 2020 budget performance, the parameters, the performance of the 2020 budget parameters are all positive to the recently revised targets as at the end of the first half of the year. The second half performance is, however, expected to be worse. The oil price benchmark in the revised budget was $28 per barrel. However, actual performance from January to June has been $38.64 per barrel. Also, in terms of oil production, in the revised budget, it was set at 1.8 million barrels per day. But the current average from January to June is 1.88 million barrels per day. Inflation was projected to be at 14.13, but is currently at 12.82. And then the growth rate was a negative 4.2 projected. However, the first quarter performance, which has been released by NBS, shows a 1.87%. As at the end of June 2020, federal government's retained revenue was 1.81 trillion. This is 68% of the prorated target. The federal government share of oil revenues was 859.1 billion, representing 169.48% performance over and above the prorated sum in the revised 2020 budget. While non-oil tax revenues totaled 581.23 billion. This is 72% of the revised target. Companies' income tax and value-added tax collections were at 301.06 billion, and 85.4 billion, representing 73% and 60% respectively of the pro rata revised targets for the period. Customs collection was 184.36 billion, which is 82% of the revised target. Other revenues amounted to 372.04 billion, a lowly 28% of target. NLNG dividends, recoveries and stamp duty collected during the period, however, yet to be booked in the fiscal accounts. So in terms of the revenue performance, the total federal retained revenues, excluding that of the government-owned enterprises, fell short by about 32%. So on the expenditure side, 9.97 trillion was appropriated, excluding government-owned enterprises and project-tied loans, while 4.45 trillion, representing 89.3% of the pro rata 4.99 trillion, was expended. Of the expenditure, 1.57 trillion was for debt service and 1.61 trillion for personnel costs, including pensions. As at the end of June 2020, only 444.75 billion had been released for capital expenditure. This was largely due to the budget revision exercise. However, this has increased to 1.2 trillion by July 31st, 2020. So in terms of expenditure performance so far, we're not doing very badly, especially with our debt service obligations, where we are currently meeting up. The 2021 to 2023 MTF projections. The key parameters, as well as other macroeconomic projections driving the medium-term revenue and expenditure framework, have been revised in line with the emergent realities. The new figures, as presented, this is oil benchmark for 2021. We're projecting for $40 per barrel. Oil production at 1.86. Inflation here is projected at 11.95. And then the nominal GDP at 142.19, 2.1 billion, or rather in trillions. The GDP growth rate at 3%. Oil GDP growth rate has a strong positive correlation with real GDP growth rate in Nigeria. Consequently, changes in the underlying drivers of oil GDP will significantly affect real GDP performance. Although Nigeria's total production capacity is 2.5 million barrels per day, current crude production is about 1.4 million barrels per day, in compliance with the OPEC Plus production quota, and an additional 300,000 barrels per day of condensate, totaling about 1.7 million barrels per day. The World Bank forecasts that crude oil prices will rise gradually from an average of $42 per barrel in 2021 to $44.5 per barrel in 2022 and $47 per barrel in 2023. The EIA expects Brent crude oil prices to average $41 per barrel during the second half of 2020 and $50 per barrel during 2021, reaching $53 per barrel by the end of 2021. with oil price projected to remain low and volatile in 2020, and Nigeria's compliance with the OPEC Plus cuts by reducing base production to between 1.412 million barrels per day and 1.579 million barrels per day from June to the end of the year, growth in oil GDP is expected to decline in 2020. Oil GDP is expected to contract by 12.96% in 2020, year-on-year, causing an economic-wide drag, resulting in slower growth in non-oil GDP by minus 3.6% year-on-year. Based on this, real GDP is expected to decline by 4.2% in 2020. The nominal GDP is expected to increase from 130,836.1 billion in 2020 to 132,125.4 billion in 2021, and then up to 138,415.8 billion in 2023. Similarly, consumption expenditure is projected to stay flat at 118,735.2 billion in 2020 and 118,468.7 billion in 2021, and grow to 124,358.5 billion by 2023, reflecting a gradual steadiness in the recovery. Inflation, however, is expected to remain above single digits over the medium term, given the structural issues impacting on cost of doing business, including high cost of food distribution. The overview of the Federation account revenues, based on the parameters that I've just highlighted, we expect net Federation account, the main pool, to be 6.716. After the removal of the 5% transfer to the Police Trust Fund, we expect the net Federation account in 2021 to be 6.674 trillion, 7.818 trillion in 2022, and 8.586 trillion in 2023. From the VAT pool, the net VAT pool account is expected to have about 1.7 trillion in 2021, 1.8 trillion in 2022, and 1.879 trillion in 2023. In terms of this revenue framework, we expect the share of the CIT to federal government to be much lower in 2021 to 681,718,292,330 because of the shutdowns of activities in 2020. So this will expected to affect company income tax. But we expect that this will pick up in 2022 and go up to 862,157,372,903. Also, in terms of revenue from the GOEs, because we are bringing in now more GOEs into the budget, we expect revenue of about 2.17 trillion in 2021 as against 990 that we had in 2020. And this is expected to be growing upwards. So the amount available for the federal government budget, including the GOs, for 2021 is expected to be 7.497 trillion. In terms of expenditure, look at a statutory transfer of 481.410,141,366 billion in 2021, and a recurrent non-debt of 5.746 trillion. The aggregate capital expenditure is expected to be 3.331 trillion. The critical ratios, looking at the numbers that I have read, show that fiscal deficit, including GOEs, is expected to be 5.1 trillion. And this represents about 3.62% in terms of deficit to GDP. Excluding the GOEs, this should be 3.14% of deficit to GDP. How are we trying to manage this fiscal crisis? Fiscal measures are being instituted to improve government revenue and entrench a regime of prudence with emphasis on achieving value for money. The goal of fiscal interventions will be to keep the economy active through carefully calibrated regulatory policy measures designed to boost domestic value addition, de-risk the enterprise environment, attract external investment and sources of funding. Improving the tax administration framework to optimize government revenue has been a major thrust of the administration's Strategic Revenue Growth Initiative. We have included in the 2021 to 2023 FSP a tax expenditure statement overview, which seeks to dimension the cost of tax waivers, concessions, and evaluate their policy effectiveness. To enhance independent revenue generation and collection, government will aim to optimize the potentials, operational and collection efficiency of government-owned enterprises with a view to generating significantly higher revenues required to fund the federal government budget. Current suboptimal revenue performance of government-owned enterprises will be addressed through the effective implementation of the enhanced performance management framework. The key elements of the reform initiative include performance contracts for chief executive officers and key management staff, which will set financial indicators and targets for each government-owned enterprise. The cost-to-revenue ratio of government-owned enterprise has, by presidential directive, been limited to a maximum of 60 to 70%, while regular monitoring and reporting of revenue and expenditure performance of government-owned enterprises will be undertaken by both the Budget Office of the Federation and the Office of the Accountant General of the Federation. The Finance Bill 2020, which will accompany the 2021 budget proposal, will contain measures to advance the Strategic Revenue Growth Initiative. We shall also work closely with the National Assembly to amend relevant laws that need to be amended to help with the Strategic Revenue Growth Initiative. Let me conclude here. We have revised the 2020 federal government budget, and we accelerate implementation to maintain budget credibility, enhance GDP growth, and promote social inclusion. The draft 2021-2023 FSP has been prepared against the backdrop of a global recession and heightened global economic uncertainty. The draft 2021-2023 medium-term fiscal framework shows that there are continuing global challenges due to COVID-19 pandemic. The medium-term outlook for Nigeria suggests that fiscal risks are somewhat elevated, largely due to COVID-19 related disruptions, which have exacerbated structural weaknesses in the economy. Nigeria faces significant medium-term fiscal challenges, especially with respect to its revenues, which, if not addressed, could snowball into a debt sustainability crisis. In furtherance of our objective of greater comprehensiveness and transparency in the budget process, the Federal Government of Nigeria 2021 budget will reflect the revenues and expenditures of all significant GOEs, and these are about 60, not just the 10 that we had in the 2020 budget. Weaker than expected economic performance threatens our ambitious revenue growth targets, as seen in the 2020 revised budget and the updated medium-term projections. Achieving fiscal sustainability and macro-fiscal objectives of government will require bold, decisive, and urgent action. Government is determined to act as may be required. Thus, key performance will be implemented with increased vigor to improve revenue collection and expenditure management. Thank you very much, distinguished senators, for listening.
2023 approved our medium-term fiscal framework, which prepared based on some assumptions. The first assumption is that the crude oil production will average 1.86 barrel per day for 2021 and 2.09 for 2022 and 2.38 for 2023. Crude oil price is projected to average $40 per barrel for 3 years, for the 3 years period. Average exchange rate is projected at 360 naira per US dollar for the 3 years period. Tax rate to remain the same for the period 2021 to 2023. Total projections by the service for the 2021 is 5.8 trillion. 2022, 6.9 trillion. 2023, 7.4 trillion. The above projections are actually a function of these assumptions earlier mentioned, and we want to also use this opportunity to appreciate the support of critical stakeholders, particularly the National Assembly, and pray that at FRS we will continue to get your support. Thank you, and God bless the Federal Republic of Nigeria.
Is to present a projection for revenue generation in the next 3 years. But before then, I think I need to draw the attention of the committee on two things. First and foremost, there are 2 agreements that we have signed, and they have come into effect. First among those two is the WTO trade agreement, which is tagged as FTA. That is going to adversely affect the revenue we generate from import. So some of the goods that will be imported into Nigeria will come in at zero duty. Secondly, we have also signed the African Free Trade Area Agreement. That has come into effect, and that will have an adverse effect on revenue we generate from intertrade within Africa. These two components, in addition to the present pandemic, which we hope, by God's grace, that by the turn of the year 2021, we put behind us this pandemic, and therefore we hope and pray that trade will be enhanced, and therefore import and export would also be enhanced. It is based on this projection, distinguished senators, that we in the Nigerian Customs Service came up with this projection that I will present to you. It is our belief that in 2021, all things being equal, by the grace of God, we should be able to generate a total collection of 1.465 trillion. This, as you all know, is going to be made of the main federation account, which will include import, export, and all fees, and also special levies from the federation account, which will include Cmtte levy, wheat flour, wheat grain, brown rice, 100% rice levy, 30% textile levy, and 100% cigarette levy. And of course, the non-federation, which will comprise of 7% port development levy, 5% sugar levy, 1% comprehensive import supervision scheme, 0.05% ECOWAS tariff liberalization scheme, cement levy, 10% steel levy, and 35% National Automotive Council levy, and then 1% Nigerian Export Supervision Scheme levy. This put together is what we expect, that at the end of the day, we will be having 1.465 trillion in 2021. And then 2022, hopefully, and we believe things will begin to progress, and post-pandemic, we expect that we should be able to generate 1.704 trillion. And then, some 2023, things will probably level up, and hopefully we generate 1.758 trillion naira. This will comprise of all this less VAT. We also collect VAT, but VAT is accounted for by the chairman of FIRS. So we don't include that. But when we talk on the total collection, we normally put these figures together. So with this, Mr. Chairman, distinguished senators, I believe that custom, so far, we have been doing very, very excellent. As at today, our taking has not really dropped drastically. We're making marginal gain, and I think that is as a result of orders placed for import before the pandemic. And we hope that within the period of the pandemic, we'll not see the drastic change in terms of import. So far, so good. Thank you very much.
distinguished Senate President, Senate leaders, Chairman of Finance and National Planning, distinguished senators, Honorable Minister of State, Finance, Budget and National Planning, heads of agencies, ladies and gentlemen, very good morning to you all. Sincere apologies from the Group Managing Director, who was apparently prepared to come here this morning, but there was an emergency within the group, and so the board summoned him on an emergency meeting this morning. So he asked me to rush down to present our submission. As you are all aware, we operate in an industry that is highly challenged with volatility. We are mainly driven in terms of performance by volume, price, and cost. Depending upon how we manage these three, that's what drives our overall contribution to the revenue part of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Clearly, notwithstanding the COVID, in 2020, we had almost reached a 2.4 million barrels production target. But because of the price collapse, which we have no control over, the OPEC had to come into rescue, and we were hit with a severe cut that saw us coming down to 1.4 million barrels per day. Essentially, we could do nothing about production since we are part of this OPEC cartel. And equally, the price, we are price takers. It depends upon what the market provides. That's the price we have to sell the crude from, and gas as well. But what we can do, we could do something about our cost structure. And that has remained our focus. And it is our intention to bring down the cost of production over the relevant period, unit operating cost, to about $13 per barrel. In the year under plan, 2021, we envisage an average production of 1.954 million barrels per day. This includes 90,000 barrels for repayment agreement, which we agreed with our partners as an incremental production that they can use to offset the legacy cash call areas we had owed them over the years. In 2021, we project, based on a $40 oil price and a 1.954 million barrels per day, with an exchange rate of 3.16 naira to the dollar, a total revenue of 5.6 trillion naira, with cost of operations at 2 trillion naira, giving us a net remittance to the Federation of 3.545 trillion naira. Similarly, in 2022, we anticipate to generate 6.575 trillion naira, while controlling costs at 2.19 trillion. The net remittance to the Federation will amount to 4.385 trillion naira. Furthermore, in 2022, we envisage to realize 7.376 trillion naira, with cost at 2.035 trillion naira, with a net remittance of 5.341 trillion naira. That's our submission, distinguished President, distinguished senators. Thank you very much.
Minister, which was done on her behalf by the Minister of State, the Federal Revenue Service, the Customs, and of course the NNPC. Let me congratulate everyone for being very prepared to ensure that we continue to improve on our performances. Some of my questions may be out of our concerns of a very high level of optimism expressed, and some of the questions may be out of concern for what could be the outcome or the consequences of our desire to collect more revenues for government and the consequences on citizens. The Honourable Minister of State, in your presentation, and of course it's something we know, that the GDP growth this year, especially with the consequences of the COVID, has been negative, minus 4.2%. But you are giving us hope that in 2021 we'll grow at 3% GDP. That is coming out of a hole as deep as 4.2 meters and then jumping 3 meters. That is, you are jumping over 7 meters. What do you think you would do or we need to do to achieve this? Because we need to be properly guided. It's not going to be easy, but it's feasible and it's achievable. So you need to give us maybe the reasons to go home and sleep that we are going to achieve 3%. For FRS, since you came on board, the new management, you have been working with the National Assembly and have been quite supportive. Your desire to improve in your collection means that we have to deploy technology. How far, so far, has this technology deployment helped you? And of course, you know, maybe I told you this some time ago. Someone told me we had over 20 trillion of stamp duty money somewhere. And he gave me a document. That was at the beginning of this year or middle of April, that we had money all over the place. And when I went further to ask those who should know better, I was told we had only 20 billion. No, not 20 billion. Sorry? 40 billion. Instead of maybe 20 trillion, sorry. So, how do you think your collection of stamp duties will now take us to that trillion level club? Because we can achieve something far more than we have done with stamp duties, especially now that we have provided the amendment to the Act. National Assembly is giving you 100 support. We need to maximize collection so that we're able to make up for losses elsewhere. Nigeria Customs, thank you very much, CG. You have done so well. But amount collected so far this year is 604 billion. Is that correct? 604 billion. CG? July. As of July. So by the end of the year, how much do you think we will collect?
Your mic.
$1.2 trillion. That is by the end of the year, if the trend continues. Yeah, okay. We pray that it continues and it even gets better. So next year, we are looking at 1.46 trillion. We are assuming COVID will finish or maybe leave this world by the end of the year. Because you are thinking of end of 2021. If we have a means of getting COVID out of this country and everywhere else in the world, we want it to leave at the end of this month. To have it up to the end of next year will be so tragic for the world and humanity. But that is the will of God. You think the impact of COVID will not make it impossible for you to achieve 1.46 trillion next year?
Your mic.
We are thinking that after COVID, we are rush both from importers and exporters, because the industrial world will be in a rush to make up for the lost period. And also our own importers here, who are also industrialists, also rush to make up for the lost period. And within that, we are building that there are a lot of export, import, and export. So based on that trend, we said that I think we flow of import and export. It may happen, it may not happen. But that's what we're thinking about.
So we are likely to collect 1.5 trillion, about 1.5 trillion, 1.46. Okay, that's fine enough. So we wish that we are able to achieve that, but I think I will agree with you to some extent that post-COVID, there will be rush to import and export. So probably the first 6 months of next year will witness that, because it cannot be rushed for the whole 12 months. The earliest part of the year, you see the rush, and we may see more revenues coming in. I want to ask you, are we thinking of doing or adjusting any tariff or something?
We have been pushing for an expansion of our own excise collection. During the tourism regime, a lot of industries were exercised, including Coca-Cola, all these food producers, pizza, so all the carbonated drinks. And the only one that were approved was tobacco and alcoholic drinks. And the understanding there was that the tobacco and exercise of these universities so that we can collect exercise from there. Like I said, gradually, the import will be reduced, the collection of import will reduce because of the trade agreements we have signed. So if we don't expand our exercise, then the collection from customers will suddenly drop drastically. So we have been pushing for this, and hopefully we'll get it. If we do get it, then it should expand our collection and then give us a revenue ground in terms of what we collect.
What is the argument for the excising Cmtte and others?
The government was of the view that they needed some of these industries needed to mature. And we're talking almost close to 20 years now. Since then, if they are not mature at least, then they're trouble. Also, secondly, some industries like Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola is accidental waste. It's only in Nigeria that Coca-Cola produces until nothing.
So does it mean that Coca-Cola is given some space to grow in Nigeria?
No, it's tax expenditure.
You see, we need to support indigenous companies, Nigerian companies, especially enterprises that are growing. We need to support them. But of course, we also need to ensure that we monitor their progress. If you are giving someone, you are excising someone, a company, then you should be monitoring to see the progress, whether the excising has really achieved what we thought would be achieved. I think the Senate and indeed the National Assembly will be interested to know the outcomes, the support given, whether they have yielded the desired results, and if not, why not? Is it the excising? What else can we do? Or is the excising not the solution? But for Coca-Cola, I think it's a misnomer. Coca-Cola is a misnomer that you will not charge Coca-Cola for so I think this is not going to be an executive function alone. We need to work together, the executive and the legislature, to see those that really are supposed to be given some exempt. Because I can't understand if we are giving Coca-Cola a free ride, then, okay, that is undermining our economy. This is an established business all over the world, and it's a dominant business in the soft drink industry. So unless we are making ourselves the country of subsidy for international companies, we should look into that. And of course, let's also see, you work out that, what we have lost over the years.
In conjunction with FRS.
Yes, FRS, you do the same, please. We are not trying to undermine the previous policy, but we should be reviewing policies, really. When the excising took place, probably there was no harsh environment, there was no difficulty like we are facing today. while we don't want to overburden businesses, but we have to be practical and realistic in the national interest. Thank you very much, and God bless. The Minister, okay, I've asked you something. You have to, about the 7%, 7.2% jump. FRS, you will also respond how the technology deployment that you have done so far and the stamp duties collection that will also yield us probably 5 trillion next year, or is it more? Okay. Honourable Minister.
Yes, Mr. Senate President, these numbers are coming from projections from the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, which looks at the economy. They do not take the numbers on their own. They run their surveys, and then they come up with the numbers. But as we provide a stimulus of almost 600 billion in the agri sector, we expect a higher contribution to the GDP by another 3 to 4% from the agri sector. As we create more activities, the economy is stimulated, people are able to spend, and then the GDP will grow.
Sarah Committee on an audit of stamp duty that were hit at all in the hands of agents and were not remitted to the federal government coffers. The second issue we have also addressed in that respect is to sit and test the remittances currently by money deposit banks, and also look at the circulars that were released by CBN. So the circular by the CBN to the money deposit banks was on the 15th of January 2016, and then the circulars also from the Office of Comptroller-General was to Ministry Department and agencies was in 2017 or 2015. So while we look at all this, we are beginning to say yes, there are potentials, but the 20 trillion arrears may not likely to be true. Secondly, on the issue of technology, while we came on board, we approached the leadership of National Assembly, particularly the distinguished Senator, Senate President, and the Chairman of the Committee on Finance, and you have always given us the support we require, and I can authoritatively confirm to you that the signs are already there, because with the technology we deploy now, we'll be able to collect average of about 2 to 3 billion weekly from money deposit banks, as against 78 million that were remitted back then before end of 2019. So what we have done was to engage them and said, the monies you are collecting, you are only acting as agent of collection. The burden is not borne by you, so the bonus lies on the fact that you will remit this as I command you. And we are also happy to confirm to you that even some of the top banks that we are not remitting stamp duties before now, we have been able to work on them. They are currently remitted. Some of them remit as much. There was a particular one that remit about 1.2 billion alone in a week. So this is the issue so far. Secondly, we continue with the sensitization of taxpayers, and particularly the general public, on the issue of stamp duty. Because we believe before now that stamp duty is a new law in this country, and we have been able to, or we are currently working on sensitizing the public that it is a law that came with our colonial masters since 1923.
How are the banks responding I'm particular about what they have taken.
Was to say, let's audit from the debt that the circular was given to them, mandated them to charge 50 naira on banking transaction involving individuals or body corporate and individual as at 15th January 2016. That is the first thing we want to do. If we are done with that, and there are signs that yes, there are a lot of money in there, and then we now walk backward. That is what we want to do. But we want to rely on the fact that we only had a mandate on the 15th of January 2016 to charge customers that transaction tax.
And before then, there wasn't. Not a lot. What if out for a more realistic figure of higher than 500 million? I think more than 500. Well,
So, Mr. Chairman, the FRL, based on what he said, should be able to raise 1.5 trillion in 2021 to reduce the deficit. Mr. Chairman, I raise my case.
Thank you so much, Senator. Chairman and members of the committee. I will speak to some of the issues and then I will allow the technical people around to respond to the rest. You did mention about $40 per barrel, how realistic it is.
And how do you arrive at the $40?
Yeah. Each time we have to make these projections, we do very wide consultations within the country and also outside of the country. We meet with NNPC, we also relate with OPEC, and then scan the world environment. In the course of my presentation, I did even make reference to the US EIA and the projections that they have made. It's based on these various consultations and projections that we arrived at the $40 per barrel that we have projected.
Do you take into cognizance the recent attempt by China to buy more US fuel than is it part of the consideration for this?
All these are the considerations we have taken. Like I said, we scan the world economy. We meet with the various bodies, even OPEC, before we arrive at these numbers. These numbers don't just come from finance. It's as a result of consultation. Even the exchange rate that is used is also based on consultation. You recall that first it was 360 naira per dollar, and it's only recently, I think about a few days ago, that the CBN adjusted this to 379. But in the detailed MTF that we have submitted, you will recall that we have a line for exchange rate gain in the event that there are changes in the exchange rate, since it's not something that is constant all year round.
How do we arrive at this exchange rate gain when already we have two rates operating? There are two rates operating. There is 360 and there is 380.
Okay.
So which one?
As a government, we do not recognize the black market rate, and we cannot, it is illegal to begin to use the black market rate. So if the government recognizes the black market rate and begins to use it, then it's the black marketers that are running the economy. What we have tried to do, working with the central bank, is to try and collapse all exchange rates and make sure that we have a single exchange rate as much as possible, which is the importers-exporters window.
I've got point that we have a single exchange rate because we are a government, and for us to be operating double or two exchange rates, it was for a lot of questioning.
Currently, that is what we are using, which is the I&A window, and that's why they reviewed it upwards to 379, because that's what the I&A window is.
So we can't reference the black market rate. That would be illegal to do. As for GDP numbers, like I said, there is a statutory body, which is the NBS, that is responsible to scan and do surveys and come up with data. What I have presented to you is what they have presented to me. The government doesn't interfere in the data that they produce. Otherwise, that means we can skew it any way that we want to be. But we want Nigerians to have the data as true as it is, based on their people on the ground and the surveys that they do. So I cannot on my own decide that I do not like minus 4.1% growth rate and then lie to Nigerians and say, let us make it positive. So what we have given you is what we've gotten from the NBS. Then for budget optimization, the agri sector, trade and industry, also in the real sector areas, housing, road construction. And you would have seen that there has been a lot of lockdowns, and because there are lockdowns, one of the areas we expect to see a lot of growth is in the telecom sector, because a lot of meetings are now happening virtually. A lot of activities are going on virtually. Even commissioning of projects are going on virtually. So activities in the telcos are going up, and we expect to be able to drive some form of growth from those areas. But that's in the lockdown. However, we are now easing up those lockdowns. And so other areas that have been shut down will now start activities. And as those stimulus packages begin to go in, because we look at the areas of rural roads around agro corridors to help stimulate growth in production and get food that is produced to the market. That is one area of stimulus. There's another area where we're spending a lot of resources in the 6 geopolitical zones for maintenance of our roads, again creating activity. We are looking at the solar installation of almost 5 million homes with off-grid solar energy. So with all of this going on, and the fact that the lockdown itself is not easing, more people are going back to work, construction activities will pick up, and the economy picks up. So the projection of minus 4.41 was without the stimulus. Like I said, we have to wait to see what the third quarter report is from NBS. But the second quarter, yes, we had the possible one can do, and it hasn't been done. So the figures that we have given you is based on the situation the way it is today. Then you talked about privatization. It's actually ongoing. The power assets are being sold, and then the proceeds are also being received. However, it is slow because of the COVID restrictions. And as for the marginal feed, recent marginal fees action have taken place. So the process also have started. So we expect to get those revenues as projected.
What about the stamp duty? Why are we maintaining 2 different accounts?
I would have the chairman FRS and DG Budget speak to that.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Other protocols observed. First of all, I think on this stamp duty thing, we need to be clear about. You're asking why is the central bank seeming to be overly involved in this? What is the origin of this? In 2016, as the economy taps into recession, I recall we were at an economic management team meeting deliberating on how to shore up revenues. And the central bank governor came up with this idea for those of us who maintain bank accounts. For every debit on your bank account, you run a current account. The banks will normally charge you currently 0.1%. of all the debits, what they call commission on turnover. And he came up with the idea to introduce a charge on credits into bank accounts. But at that point, we came up with the name stamp duty. No, they're not setting targets.
I'm aware that the central bank that gives targets to what is put in the budget for this particular.
No, we consult with them because of their. I mean, they have a view. Remember, this is based on
collected by central bank. The FIRS is also collecting stamp duty.
Yes.
On behalf of the Federation. I want us to please, let's distinguish this thing very clearly. In the revenue profile, which at the end of the budget presentation consideration that we draw, we have stamp duty. The stamp duty contained in that revenue profile relates to this we are talking about. While the one collected by FIRS is not reflected in the revenue profile of the federal government. Or it only comes to us as our own share into the federation account. By the time we walk through all the calculations, these states, their own respective revenue, then our own portion. So how do we reconcile these two? That means we have two different kinds of accounts. One, electronically collected, which is costing ripple between FIRS and the Nigerian Postal Service. And the second one is the one which the chairman has just mentioned that now they generate between 2 to 3 billion on the weekly basis. So I want us to have the picture, clarify the picture, let us know which one we stand with. Because that one in the revenue profile shows is for the federal government. This 500 billion is for the federal government. The one by the FIRS, except the federal chairman is telling me that whatever I collect to is for the federal government and not on behalf of the federal government. The FIRS chairman, you have a
Thank you, distinguished Senator Agbas. I have a comment on both election and the stamp duty. Well, let me start with the stamp duty. The issues we have in stamp duty administration should be domiciled with the DG budget for now. And on the issue of cost of collection,
there are indeed two separate stamp duties, and they are both reflected in the fiscal framework that has been presented to the National Assembly. Okay. There is the one that FIRS and even the state IRS collect on transactions.
Yes.
In the fiscal framework for 2021, what we have there is 12 billion naira, and that's for the entire federation. Okay. At our meeting with FIRS this week, FIRS came with an enhanced projection of 28 billion naira for that line. That is in the federation. If you look at the fiscal framework, the distribution items, for the federation includes, it includes in what you have currently, it includes 12 billion naira for the entire federation. The 2 billion naira that the FIRS chairman has been quoted as saying they're currently collecting is this same electronic stamp duty that the Finance Act 2019 has now designated FIRS as a collecting agent for.
I think for us to raise this matter, the document,
revenue ratio. If you recall, in the minister's presentation, he made the point that, one of the concluding remarks said Nigeria faces significant medium-term fiscal challenges, especially with respect to its revenues, which, if not addressed, could snowball into a debt sustainability crisis. And I believe that that point is fully appreciated by all, which is why the Finance Committee is being very supportive of the ministry in the efforts to, shore up, revenues. Then the point about $40 per barrel being too tight relative to the World Bank's own projection. The World Bank's number, their own view on oil price is just one of the considerations that we take into account. Again, if you look at that slide 18 in the minister's presentation, other than the World Bank, we also reference the EIA's own projections. So while the World Bank projects, for instance, average $42 per barrel in 2021, the EIA projects, that it will reach $53 per barrel by end of 2021. And these are only just two of the sources that we consider. So we'll take a broad view and then arrive at what we think is reasonable. And we do this also in consultation with the NNPC, who are the people in the field. So whatever oil benchmark price we adopt here is something that we consult actively and agree with NNPC. And I think the CFO of NNPC was in the house. He'll be able to speak more to that. Then your observation about certain revenue items that are showing blanks as of the half-year mark. Again, on slide 12 of the minister's presentation, the last bullet there says, NLNG dividends, recoveries, and stamp duty collected during the period are, however, yet to be booked in the fiscal accounts. So, those haven't been reflected there, but there are reflections, and those will be, reflected. And I can say, for instance, that as of that date, on the stamp duty account, there was a 65 billion naira that was subsequently transferred, but hadn't been, accounted for by the June 30th, date. With some of the other revenue items, there's also a seasonality. Okay, independent revenues are based on remittances of surpluses. We are currently chasing the GOEs to do the remittances for, for 2019 that are past due. They are supposed to, for 2020, 2 quarters of remittances are due already. First, yes.
In that regard, your projection for 2020 is 900 and something billion. While 2021, we are looking at 2.17 trillion from the GOs. Yes, I agree we have increased it to 60 GOs. That is government holdings. And with the current reality of what we have been able to gather within this period, how achievable is this target?
The gross revenue of the 10 GOEs for 2021, the 2.17 trillion is the gross revenue of the 60 GOEs. That, yes, no, without taking out their expenditure. When you now come to, what is actually then due as operating share of federal government's operating surplus, those are the lines that Senator was referencing, which for 2020, because in 2020, even though it was only 10 GOEs whose budgets were integrated, you were still targeting operating surpluses from all of them, all the 60. So we had 30 billion projected in 2020. In 2021, that is 961 billion as our share of, yes. So in 2021, 2.17 is the total revenue they project to make, out of which the federal government's share, as an...
Is it in accordance with the Fiscal Responsibility Act, or you just give them a target that this is what federal government will take from you as part of their own share of revenue?
No, the Fiscal Responsibility Act says the federal government will take 80% of the operating surplus. Yes. Okay. Pursuant to that also, Mr. President has given a directive that their cost to revenue ratios must not exceed a range of 60 to 70%.
That's a private arrangement.
No, it's not a private arrangement. The president is empowered to do so.
Is it the law?
No, the law doesn't say otherwise. The law only speaks to what percentage of their operating surplus. The law doesn't set a cost to revenue ratio.
That is what is known to us.
Yes.
80% of the operational surplus.
Yes.
What is known to us. And as a lawmaker, here we can only adhere strictly to that. And if there is need for us to now amend that act, let it come with the Finance Bill 2020 in accordance with what the President wants, so that we can go look at it and incorporate it into the Fiscal Responsibility Act and inform part of the law and only guide it, so that if anybody comes up tomorrow, if they say they are a private agent, it will only be a document which will not agree me as a lawmaker to take decline and seek that. So you come as this suggested to do now, let it be part of the finance bill coming up alongside with the appropriation bill that we submitted before the...
Your profit is your revenue less your expenditure. By an administrative process and which he is empowered to, he now says to you, this is the limit of your expenditure. So you cannot spend more than that, So if, for instance...
What you are attempting to do,
yes.
with this GOE, I want to explain to you, what you are attempting to do is to guide the GOE, yes, so that they don't give reasons for frivolous expenditure to suck up the revenue generated by them. I agree with you. And in this same spirit, I am now putting it to you that administrative document is not known to us in the legislature. We only know the Act of the National Assembly and the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. So if there is need for us to now amend that existing fiscal responsibility to fit into what the President has said, it will not be a bad idea to now come up with an amendment to the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Under Section 80, you now make it a subsection 2, and you now say this, so that by the time you have their document, they also will not have opportunity to escape by saying that that's not the law, this is the law. So the law will be there to guide everybody and to make sure everybody fall in line in accordance with the wish of the President and examining the National Assembly.
Let me put it this way. Is there any collateral damage in escalating an administrative directive into legislation?
There's none, but as first of all, the process of lawmaking is not FRA 2007. It hasn't been amended in 13 years. This is a flexible process. No, I'm not saying so. I'm just saying that, first of all, setting that administrative, is there's no imperative to make it. It could be. It says 60 to 70% today. If tomorrow it becomes desirable for him to lower that to even 50%, it has to have that flexibility. And I'm saying he has the powers under the Constitution to set that administratively. And he's the chief executives of those organizations are his appointees. And if he says, just like when we were doing the budget, the revised budget, we were mandated, cut the budget, the overhead budget for MDAs by 31%. We did that. That's his power. Yes, so what we now bring what he has, but that administrative process, this is above my pay grade. It's the president to decide whether he wants to have it legislated.
But they do not cede our powers to the executive.
No.
It is our power, and I will say this for the optic time. If it is to amend that law more than 20 times.
That is not too rigid, that allows for some flexibility, and then we share it with you. Thank you. Oil pricing at $40 per barrel, and there were some expectations from your end that it should be higher.
Yeah.
And if we make it higher, and the reality is that it is lower, then there is a difference. In the same way, like I've shown in that page 7, 2016 to 2019, even though the targets have not been met, you understand, there's been a steady increase, in the revenues that have come. And we have also accepted that we are not at our best. That there's still a lot of room for improvement. And that is why, like the stamp duty thing we're talking about, for instance, in 2019, I don't think we got up to 20 billion. We are projecting a 500 billion now. You understand? We are being told that 500 is too small, we can get trillions. If it's just to write the numbers, yes, we can write a trillion, but then we will not be able to meet with the target. And that is why we are having all of these interactions to say that as much as possible, let's be conservative, with the numbers that we put to ensure that they are achievable.
Now, before I do, Nigerian Investment Promotion Council. Yes, Nigerian Export Promotion.
Going straight to your questions. Number one, there's nothing like 48 million barrels missing oil. If you want to corroborate or validate that, you have the right to call on DPR. They are the regulator of the industry. That's one. Two, no molecule, no ship leaves the country without clearance from the Navy. So that's another secondary source you can verify. The Navy, Nigerian Navy. Yes. I'm saying you can corroborate. If you don't agree to what NNPC says, this is your alternative of finding the right, the truth about it. Thirdly, you could also commission a forensic audit as the National Assembly, of course, using your own budget funds. Your second question, with respect to cost, I can tell you the current GMD is a change agent. There are so many things we have cut to ensure that maximum revenue is remitted to the Federation. It is our intention to bring it to that $13 per barrel cost of production. How will we do that? Number one, we have analyzed our cost structure. We have found the cost drivers. Typical of them is the crude handling charges, which is the partners charge. You can imagine moving 1 barrel of crude from here to China at the cost of $2, shipping it down to that market over a 30-day journey. Well, here in Nigeria, moving it from the oil well to the flow station or the terminal, your partners are charging you as high as $7 per barrel. So that is where we are beginning to focus and scrutinize their budgeting process and the approval process with respect to their contracting and procurement processes as well. With respect to benchmark, if anybody were to be able to predict oil price, then that individual does not need to work because you make money. We call it voodoo economics. Nobody can determine what oil price will be tomorrow. It's a question of forces of supply and demand. $40 that has been put forward by the budget office, it's the ideal price to carry along. We have for a long time been too optimistic. Yes, sir. It's not my cameraman. So please move there. You're blocking some senators. Can you move where the others are, please? Go to where the others are. Sorry, distinguished chairman. Apologies for that. Sorry, chairman. So, in all honesty, sir, I think as a country, we need to learn to budget with some pessimistic thinking. The COVID-19 has taught us a very strong lesson. Prices went as low as $10, and when you even deduct the discounts, it was far below $10. So for anyone to say that $40 is too pessimistic, I think we're not helping ourselves. We have to learn to budget on a price that we think comfortably. If we sustain the current OPEC cuts, we think the $40 scenario will prevail. And as economics rebound, China is the biggest consumer. As you heard, they are building storages to store crude. It is consumption that drives the demand, and as demand goes up, the price can go up and stabilize. Of course, we believe also that the shale oil in the U.S. might not be able to come back at $40 or so $40 oil. So anything slightly above 40, it could come back. So it is our general belief, and we support the position of the Budget Office, that as a country, we should go with a $40 scenario.
Are you saying we can go ahead and increase it to 42?
No, sir.
For now?
If I were to take decision, I will reduce it further. Because we need to save for the rainy day, sir.
No, that account that it goes to is an administrative account.
Okay, sir. All right. Okay, the fourth question, sir, with respect to deductions. There's nothing we deduct that is not appropriated. Any deduction we make is driven by what MTEP has presented and approved by the National Assembly. If what we have deducted is assumed to be excessive, we have a monthly reconciliation practice with the Revenue Mobilization and the Office of the Accountant General of the Federation. So there haven't been any outrageous deductions we have made that have not been appropriated, and we can provide evidences to support what those deductions were used for, and the Auditor General of the Federation.
Who approved your budget?
This budget is approved by the National Assembly, where we deduct. It's derived from MTEP.
Revenue from MTEP according to who? NNPC or what?
No. The National Assembly appropriates the projections of the revenues and the deductions, just as I presented this morning, the 2021 proposal.
Sir, what we are made to understand is that the budget of NNPC is not approved by the National Assembly. The budget of NNPC.
Okay, let me come there. Let me come there.
I'm coming, sir. On what we are talking about deductions, if you look at the statement of income and expenditure of NNPC, every financial year, you see how huge the expenditure is. And what we are meant to understand that from all revenue accruing to you, you have to take away all this expenditure before remitting to FAC. And there have been issues, time without number, I could recollect during the last here that it was a serious argument about deductions made by NNPC, even in the NTEP document that was given to us, that who approves all the deductions for NNPC? You cannot be a judge in your own case. You generate X millions of dollars, naira for this country, and all you do is, this is what we have that we have generated. I will deduct all the costs.
If you give me the floor. Once more, I want to confirm to you that the revenue projections and the cost of operations, which are actually the deductions, are always very clear and explicit in our MTEP submission, which are aggregated into the national budget. So it is you that approves those deductions. If you say no deductions, it means there will be no oil operations, and there will be no revenue from oil and gas. Because we have a judgment by the Supreme Court of the Federal Republic of Nigeria that confirm that cost of production is a first line charge, in the sense that you have to pay for the operations. But we cannot do it unilaterally without having the National Assembly appropriate. You have appropriated. And talking about Auditor General cannot say he has no records of us. I'm always a party in the Public Accounts Committee, both Senate and the House, for so many years. And we provide information. We've had, during the COVID period, we have had almost 3 weeks marathon with the Public Accounts Committee, Senate. So Auditor General cannot claim that he has no information from NNPC. We are publishing everything now in the website. What we receive, what we deduct, what we remit every month. Ask the DG Budget Office. This is also a requirement of the recent loan we took from IMF. So therefore, there's no truth about it. With respect to RA, repayment agreement with the IOCs, we agreed, after they agreed to take a haircut, that they will keep base production intact. It is from incremental production that they would recover their arrears that were withheld by us for a long time. And so far, one of the partners has fully recovered its own. I have the ExxonMobil. ExxonMobil, yes. The rest are also on the trajectory to fully extinguish. It's a question of production, OPEC quota, and price. So when you are supposed to be producing at 2.4 million barrels and you are suddenly cut to 1.4, what do? We have to shut in even production that we felt was really not necessary. We have to hurt the industry just to ensure that we comply with OPEC quota. Because we had to do that to ensure that the price picks up again. It's crude, 1.4. When you add condensate, that's why you get to 1.7 or thereabout. So, distinguished chairman and distinguished senators, we have nothing to hide anymore in NNPC. We publish our accounts. In the next few weeks, in the next 2-3 weeks, you will see 2019 accounts also. So, anybody wants to scrutinize, please feel free. Thank you.
Well, I'm with you.
Before I get into the figure, which is on the projection on page 13 of the presentation of so let me say that the Nigerian Export Promotion Council is basically an incentive agency. We provide incentives for exporters to drive up our exports. Nigeria has for long just relied on oil as the primary foreign exchange earner, and that has been the problem the country has been facing. I'm glad that the NNPC is there, and the Minister of State, when he told me that even at that revenue from oil, 90%, budget, the GDP is only 8%. So just so that something is really wrong. If we don't get foreign exchange from other sources, we'll continue to have this problem. The NNPC has just said now, I even thought the lowest it fell during this COVID was about $20, or it has alluded towards that even went lower than that. So how do you continue to fund your economy based on just that oil? Now, what the government is doing now is we are trying to implement what we call the zero oil plan. And that is, we NEPC presented to the federal government that, look, there are 22 other sectors that can generate at least $50 billion to the economy. And that is what we are working on. Indeed, I'd like us to try the DG of budget. I agree with you many times that it should take us off this list that from the Christian Institute, because it was the agency was added to it. And we are looking for money to drive export, and we want to collect it from us.
Who is collecting your money?
DG budget. No, on the surplus operating allowance. So we have so much, but we be able to also pay back. Because I tell you, we are incentive agency. We are incentivizing various exporters and everything to push them so they can export. That's what we're supposed to do. And then our main revenue is in our act. And that is 10% of what do you call it? No, portlet, no, not portlet. 10% of NEMASA should give us 10% of what the rate.
How often have they been giving you that?
Never.
Is that the law?
It's the law of our.
Is the law establishing you?
The law establishing.
Can we have a copy of that law?
I will provide the book.
And you for how long has that law been in existence?
Since the inception of 1992.
So 10% 1992 to date. You go and compute it.
Yeah, what has happened?
No, 10% of what?
Is that the president?
10% of what?
10% of what?
10% of trade charges. Yeah,
so 1992 to date. You compute it to bring the act. Before we finish this MTF, you bring it.
Thank you, sir. But let me update you also on that. The Attorney General has just recently written to Mr. President on behalf of this because he listens to the cases. We've had this approval before for President Jonathan, but it was not complied with.
Look,
the President has
this
just approved it just last week. And we are going to work, so we'll see how that will go. But we'll give you all the trade on the non-oil exports. So we can help the customs service. We have treated the customs service in this country as a revenue generating agency, rather than a trade facilitation agency.
Who?
The customs. That's what they should be.
Trade.
Trade.
Why you should generate the revenue?
When we get the foreign exchange and again with oil. But now the CG has told you that revenue is going to be less. We're going into the African continental free trade area now. So we're going to be earning less from imports. So if our country is not ready to export things to Africa, then that is the threat of the FCCA that will become a dumping ground.
Yeah.
And that's that's what the CGL custom is telling you, that look, that revenue you think you will get from custom, you won't get it anymore because we signed into the FCTA free trade. So that's what's going to be.
Don't you think that will encourage local production?
Not only local production, if they see we can export, if we provide that opportunity, if we mobilize our industry, our MSMEs, SMEs, that we can dominate Africa with our goods and services. And that is where the focus should be. Nigeria economy must move to an export-related economy, not import, not depending on import. No nation can survive when you don't export. Because that's why you have your foreign exchange. Our only foreign exchange is from oil. So that's why we were subscribing to all these